I recently completed this painting of a scenic road through the woods near my home. The focal point of the painting is that beautiful shaft of brilliant light that cuts right through the middle across the road. Now, when you first look at this scene, you might be ready to pull out all of your really bright greens and yellow paints and use them straight from the tube. This scene has some really brilliant colors in it. However, after watching this video, you might be surprised by the actual colors that are revealed in this reference image. It's easy for our eyes to be fooled when looking at colors around us. It's important that we take time to study the scene. Getting the colors right is essential for any painting. To help with the color palette choices for this painting, I decided to take samples of the colors in the image and then create this handy reference image. Here you can see the original image, and along each side, swatches of colors that come directly from critical areas of the subject. This color study helps me to better understand the colors in the scene so I can paint it like a pro. Keep watching to see exactly how I create this handy color reference tool. Okay, now you can see Photoshop opened on my desktop computer, and this is a reference image of a rural road near my home. I just recently did a painting from this reference image. Here's a look at the finished painting here. Before I got started with this painting, I wanted to study the colors in the original scene carefully before I chose my color palette. I think this is an essential first step to a successful watercolor painting, is identifying your colors and choosing your paints and your color palette that you're going to use. I like to limit my color palette to about 4 to 6 colors, generally at a maximum, somewhere in there. And so in order to do that, I want to carefully study my reference image. So one of the techniques I've developed is to take samples of the various colors in my reference image. And I do that here in Photoshop. By the way, I'm using Photoshop, but if you don't have that software, stick around to the end of the video and I will recommend some alternatives to Photoshop that you could use. So let's take a look at this picture. What do I see in this picture? At first glance, I see a lot of real bright colors along the roadway. I see bright color on the right-hand side. These are bright yellows, bright green colors. I've got kind of a silvery color, a bluish color on the mailbox. Got a bright yellow sign in the far distance. I've got this golden color leaves in the trees on the left and a really large green tree on the right. At first glance, I might look at these colors and think, wow, these are fully saturated, really bright colors. But as you're going to see through this exercise that I'm going to guide you through, many of these colors are not quite as bright as you might think that they are at first glance. And that's why this sampling of colors in a digital imaging software like Photoshop is very helpful. Let me show you how I do it. The first thing we're going to do is resize the canvas here in Photoshop so I have some room to place my color swatches. I'm going to go to the Image menu, Image Canvas Size. And I'm going to change the width, adding about 2,000 pixels to the image on either side. We can see now we have this white area on either side that I can swatch out my colors. I'm going to use two tools through this process. The eyedropper tool, if you press the I key on the keyboard, you'll get the eyedropper tool, which is up here on the left. And if you press the B key, that's for brush, B for brush, you can see that brush tool right here. With the I tool, eyedropper tool, I should say, press the I key, and we're going to start taking samples of colors from the image. Now, I want to decide on the areas, the colors, I think that are probably most predominant and most important in the picture. Kind of start here in the lower left corner and make my way around. This roadway here in the foreground is very important, and so I'm going to take that color sample here and then press the B key and come on over and just sample that by clicking once with the brush tool. I've made this brush about 300 pixels in diameter so that I can get a nice sample of it here. I'm interested in also knowing, very importantly, what the color of this light is. It's going across the middle of the road. Press I for the eyedropper, take a sample, B for brush, and then just click that right in there. And so I'm going to start building a palette of colors all around this image so that I have a reference of what I see here. Of course, the important, this kind of yellow color of the line going down the middle of the road. Sample that here as well. It's interesting that we think of that bright yellow as being the yellow of a school bus color, a very, very bright yellow. But when you actually sample it here, you see it's much more muted in color, not quite as yellow as we might expect. It's in the shadow here, and so this area is in the shadow, and so it's affecting the color. All right, let's keep moving our way around here. Let's go back a little further into the shadow and see what the road color is back in there. And we can see, again, it's a little darker. I'd like to sample these trees along the side of the road. Kind of choose a kind of a general color, maybe the middle brownish color that you see on these trees, and take a sample of that. It's, again, quite a bit darker and a little more brown, a little warmer color than the roadway. Really important color is these the foliage in the trees. It's a fall scene, and so the leaves have changed color. I'm going to choose some of that color up in there and sample that off to the left. And of course we can sample the sky here, and I can put that up here as well. I've sampled it, but you can hardly see that there's any color there. It's such a light color. It's almost the white of the background here. The trees on the right side of the road up in here are even lighter than the other side of the road. And sample those here at the top. You can compare this color on the left with this on the right. We have some foliage down here at the far end of the road. You can sample that. I think I'll put that over here on the left. I'd like to also sample here from the sign in the background. Take a sample of that. Control-0 will zoom me out. And if I put a swatch here, you can see now that's the color of that sign, which is interesting because we think of that sign also being a bright yellow color. But because it's in the shadow and because it's quite far away and the atmosphere between us and that sign is affecting the color, it turns out to be much more of a rust orange color. This tree is very important, so let's come up and take some sample from it. We got some green colors here, and we'll just sample those. It's kind of that darkest of greens. There's other colors in the tree. Much brighter green. And then there's even some very dark, shadowy areas in the middle of that tree. We could sample those as well. So you can see, here's a triad of colors. All similar. They're all greenish colors, but they go from almost a black, a very, very dark forest green, to a much lighter green. And so we want to get a sense for the different colors of green we would need to reproduce that tree. Very important here is this swath of very light sunlit grass here in the lower right corner. So I'm going to take a sample of that. Put it over here. It's really a pale yellow color. Of course, it appears kind of a greenish color in the reference image, but it's very light in color and much closer to yellow. We have some foreground grasses here. We can sample those. Now I want to take a sample here of a couple more things. The mailbox. The side of that mailbox is an interesting and important shape in the painting. So I want to make sure I get that. It's, of course, much bluer than many of the other swatches I've taken. And alongside that, or in the middle of that color, is the red of the flag on the mailbox. So I want to get that as well. And again, that looks really red. We think of a flag on a mailbox as being very bright red. But when I swatch it, you're going to see it's much darker than you might expect. It is a very dark red color. And that's important to keep in mind because, again, we often, in our mind, we think of a color, we think of an object, a red flag on a mailbox, and we immediately get a certain color in our mind. But we have to be careful with that because our eyes can kind of lie to us. And again, we're overriding what we see with what we think we see. We think we see a bright red, but we're actually seeing a very dark maroon colored red, very dark. And if we were to just take a bright red out of the tube and just paint it on there without neutralizing it, without darkening it, it might actually not look quite right in the painting. It might be too bright. And one more place that I want to take a sample is maybe at the back of this sign. This sign here on the left side of the road is pretty bright. It stands out quite a bit. I'm going to sample that and just swatch that over here. It's actually almost a greenish gray color, which is interesting. This is a good example of how an object like the back of the sign is really picking up some of the color in the scene, because this is a very yellowish green scene, a lot of trees. There's a lot of reflected light that's being reflected off the back of that sign, and so there is a greenish tone to that sign, even though it's really a silvery color. And so it's important to just study these colors by swatching them to really get a sense for what's going on in the picture. Now, I think I've taken enough samples. Let's just talk a little bit about what we see. We have all these colors here. But one of the first things I might do is just ask myself, what is the general temperature of the colors that I've seen? Well, there are a lot of warm colors. There's all these oranges and yellows and light greens, very warmish greens. I have a lot of yellow in them. And that gives it a real sense to the temperature of the entire scene. It's fairly warm. Of course, there are some very cool elements as well. The roadway running right down through the middle of this scene is very cool. It's gray, bluish gray, and also the blue of the mailbox there. And so we've got a contrast of temperatures. And so we want to keep that in mind. We want to keep those kind of two major areas separate from each other and really have a strong cool area in the picture and a stronger warm area so that we can create a contrast of color temperatures. Another thing I noticed by looking at these swatches of color is how neutralized everything is. Almost every color that I've swatched here is a very neutralized color, meaning it's not highly saturated. I've already discussed that some of these areas that I thought would be highly saturated really aren't. They're actually quite neutralized. A neutralized color is not as intense. It's not as saturated. It can be made by mixing the complement of a color with that color. For example, a green color could be mixed with some reds, and that would neutralize the color, pushing it more towards the center of the color wheel, towards gray, and not as saturated. And if I look at all of these colors that I've swatched, they're almost all very neutralized colors. This is something that's really true about nature. We tend to look at nature, we see colors like orange leaves and green trees and red mailbox flags, and we think, oh, right out, we want to take colors right off our palette, fully saturated colors, and use those colors in our painting. But quite often that makes a painting look quite shocking, a little garish, a little overwhelming. And because typically the colors we see in nature are not that saturated. That's something to keep in mind. And when you do a study like this, when you use this technique to study the colors of your reference image, you can really begin to see the true colors that are in the image. So there you go. That's the end of this exercise. What I would do now with this painting is I would save this file. I would export it out as a JPEG. I would put it on my tablet, my digital tablet, and I would bring it up next to me when I'm painting. So I not only have the reference, but I have all of these color swatches that I can refer to. The next thing I would do once, before I even begin painting then, is I would choose the 4 or 5 colors off my palette that I'm going to use for this. Once again, transparent yellow oxide. I think I used cerulean blue chromium. I used a quinacridone rose, and I used a neutral tint, and I used a green gold. Again, if you want to view my full tutorial where I painted this scene, I talk about the different colors I used and how I mixed them to get the colors that you see in this image. This is what my color sample reference file looks like when I'm done. This becomes a very helpful guide as I select my colors while painting. As I mentioned earlier, if you don't have Adobe Photoshop on your computer, there are lots of image editing apps out there that can be used to complete this study. On desktop computers, you can use free programs like GIMP or Affinity Photo. There are also very convenient online tools like pixlr.com or canva.com. And of course, there are tons of phone apps that work just as well. I will leave links to these programs in the description below. I encourage you to find a program that you are comfortable with and give this technique a try. It can be very enlightening to see what colors are really hiding in the reference image that you want to use for your next painting. And at the end of this video, consider watching my full-length tutorial where I show you step by step how I painted the bright sunlit road that is featured in this reference image. If you appreciate this content, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you stay informed about my next videos. And finally, if these videos aren't enough and you want an even deeper dive into the world of watercolor, check out my free and premium watercolor resources on my website at studio.krisdebruine.com. I'm working hard to compile resources and courses that will help you take your watercolor passion to the next level. Thanks for watching, have a great day, and keep on growing in watercolor.